Hey, welcome back. Glad you showed up again. I've been wandering around Reddit way too long, digging through the weird corners, and I came back with a stack of stories that are wild in all the best ways. Some are funny, some are just plain confusing, and a couple might make you wonder how people like this actually exist. If this kind of chaos is your thing, hit that like and subscribe. It helps me keep the fun going and bring you more of the internet's strangest gems. Alright, let's get into it. The guy who ate light bulbs actually saved my life. I used to rent this weird little room above a garage from a woman named Lorna, who sold crystals and did tarot readings out of her dining room. I found the place on Craigslist when I was desperate and 2 days away from sleeping in my car. She said she only rented to people who didn't eat pork or mess with Ouija boards. I didn't, so we got along fine. The room was tiny and smelled faintly like cat litter and patchouli, but it had a lock, and the rent was cheap, and there was a lemon tree in the yard I could pick from whenever I wanted. This was back when I was still going through it with my mum and had dropped out of school. I was working part-time at this indoor trampoline park and trying not to think too hard about what I was doing with my life. Anyway, one of Lorna's sons, Danny, would crash in the garage from time to time. He was in his early 30s, looked like a washed-up roadie, always wearing tank tops with holes in them, and these grimy yellow flip-flops. He had this long curly hair that he tied back with what I think was a shoelace, and he smoked cloves like it was still 2005. The first time I met him, I was coming down the stairs with a bag of laundry, and he was sitting on the driveway eating a raw bell pepper like it was an apple. He looked up at me and said, totally casual, "You ever wonder what frogs dream about?" I said not really, and he laughed like I had just told the funniest joke in the world. From then on, he treated me like we were old friends. Lorna said he was between jobs. She also said he used to be in the circus. I thought that was one of her made-up stories until I came home one night and caught him in the garage swallowing a light bulb. I mean, not the whole thing. He had this trick where he'd bite the glass and crunch it really slowly while staring straight ahead like he was in a trance. It was one of those clear little chandelier bulbs, and he didn't even bleed. I just stood there frozen with my bag of McDonald's in my hand, and he gave me this big grin and said it's all about pressure control. After that, things got stranger. Not in a scary way, just in the way that makes you question what is normal anymore. He kept weird hours. I'd come down to pee at 2 in the morning and see him in the yard doing Tai Chi in his boxers. He never wore shoes. Ever. He said the earth didn't like rubber. He had this thing where he'd talk to birds like they were co-workers. One morning I caught him scolding a crow for stealing his almonds. He said the crow's name was Reggie, and that they were in a feud. Reggie apparently had no honor. But here's the thing. Danny kind of grew on me. He was the only person who remembered my birthday that year. He made me this little sculpture out of bottle caps and wire and told me it was an emotional compass. He said if I held it while thinking about a problem, it would point me toward the right answer. I never tried it, but I kept it on my desk. We'd talk sometimes when I was coming back from work. I'd be tired and cranky, and he'd be sitting in the driveway whittling a stick into something that looked like a flute, and he'd say stuff like, "Did you know the human brain is more afraid of loneliness than death?" One time, he told me that every time he microwaved something, he felt like he was cooking his own molecules. I said I didn't own a microwave, and he looked at me so seriously and said, "Good, that's good, you're on the right track." Then one night, everything kind of fell apart. I had this shift at the trampoline park that went sideways. Some kid threw up in the foam pit, and I had to help scoop it out. And then my supervisor accused me of stealing cash from the register, which I didn't, but she was gunning for me anyway. So I didn't have it in me to fight it. I quit right there and walked out into the night with this sinking feeling in my gut. I remember thinking I should just keep walking. Maybe go sleep on a beach somewhere and disappear for a while. I got back to the garage room around midnight, and I must have looked like hell because Danny didn't say anything at first. Just handed me a glass of water and told me to breathe through my feet. I didn't know what that meant, but I sat down anyway. We sat on the steps in silence for a long time while he whittled, and I drank my water and tried not to cry. Then out of nowhere he goes, Do you want to see something that makes no sense? I said sure. He took me into the garage and pointed to this cardboard box in the corner. Inside were hundreds of tiny dolls, like little plastic baby dolls. Each one had a different thing painted on its face. Some had words, some had symbols, some just had colours smeared across like makeup. He said he found them at an abandoned storage unit auction. Said he'd been dreaming about them for months before he even knew they existed. He picked one up, one with a lightning bolt across the face, and handed it to me. "This one is yours," he said. "You can't explain it, but you'll know." I took it because I didn't want to offend him, but also because holding it gave me this weird electric chill up my spine, like someone had whispered in my ear. I know it sounds insane. I don't even believe in that kind of stuff. But I kept it. I still have it, actually. It's in the drawer where I keep batteries and keys that don't belong to anything. A couple weeks later, Danny disappeared. Lorna said he'd gone up north to help a friend build a yurt. I don't know if that was true. He left me a note on my window that just said, "Don't forget to breathe through your feet." I moved out a month after that. Got a job at a bookstore. Started talking to my mum again. Things slowly stabilized. But I still think about him sometimes. Like when I see a crow sitting too still, or when I pass someone barefoot on the sidewalk. I never figured him out. Maybe he was just some burnout with a head full of stories. Maybe he was the closest thing I'll ever meet to a wizard. Either way, he was the only person who ever looked me in the eye during that whole weird year and made me feel like I wasn't wasting space. And yeah, he ate glass. But he also made me feel like the world was stranger and more interesting than I gave it credit for. I kind of miss that. Okay, first of all, eating a light bulb? That is a level of commitment to chaos I will never understand. But honestly, the more you told me about Danny, the less the glass thing even mattered. Like, yes, he was bizarre, barefoot, arguing with crows named Reggie, but he also had this way of cutting straight through the noise. The fact that in your lowest moment he did not try to fix you, did not preach at you, just sat there, handed you water and said breathe through your feet. That is the kind of strange wisdom that sticks forever. He sounds like one of those people who blow through your life like a comet, leaving you a little shaken, a little confused, but somehow better for it. And speaking of chaos that makes no sense but kind of changes how you see the world, let me tell you about the next story. I thought I was helping a blind man, but he was definitely not blind. I was walking home from the train station last fall, probably mid-October, because I remember stepping on those stiff little leaves that sound like potato chips and thinking about how I should really call my sister back. She had left me 3 voicemails in 2 days, which usually means something annoying is going on in our family group chat. Anyway, I had just finished this brutal shift at my job doing phone support for a meal prep company, and I was not in the mood to deal with anyone. I had a headache from listening to people complain about the wrong kind of rice being shipped to them, and my feet were sore from sitting too long, which does not make sense, but happens to me anyway. I had about 10 more minutes to go when I saw this guy walking slowly down the sidewalk with one of those white canes. He had dark sunglasses on and a backpack and looked maybe late 50s. He kept tapping the edge of the sidewalk with his cane and kind of swaying like he was trying to stay balanced. I figured he must have gotten turned around, or maybe the sidewalk construction signs had thrown him off. There were orange cones and plywood ramps everywhere lately because the city had decided to fix everything at the same time as usual. I walked up to him and said, "Hey, do you need help getting somewhere?" And he jumped like I had hit him. I mean, full body flinch. Then he turned toward me, but his sunglasses stayed on. He said something like, "Oh, thank God, I think I missed my turn, and now I have no idea where I am." I told him what street we were on and asked where he was headed, and he said the library. I figured he meant the main branch, since it was the closest one, and offered to walk with him. He said that would be amazing and held out his elbow so I could guide him. The whole walk was kind of strange, but not in a huge way. He walked a little too confidently for someone who could not see, like he never hesitated at cracks or curbs. At one point, a dog barked from a backyard and he looked right at it. I mean exactly in the direction it barked from. That could have been coincidence. Then he asked me if I liked working at the meal prep place, which threw me because I had not told him what I did. I asked him how he knew, and he smiled and said he had a good ear for call center voices. That made me feel weirdly self-conscious, and I laughed, but not in a real way. When we got to the library, he thanked me and asked if I wanted to come in with him for a second so he could buy me a coffee from the vending machine. I was tired and my head still hurt, but I figured why not. The library vending machines are those old school ones with cans of juice and weird granola bars that have probably been there since 2014. We went inside and he walked straight up to the machine without hesitating. No tapping around. Just a beeline like he had memorized the whole layout. I stood behind him, watching him punch the buttons and get a grape soda like it was no big deal. He turned around and handed it to me and said, "Here, this one is the best, trust me." I took it, even though I hate grape soda, and said thanks. Then I asked him how he found the button so fast, and he said muscle memory. At that point, I just kind of smiled and said I should get going. And he nodded and said, "Oak, but before you go, can I ask you something kind of personal?" I said sure, because I'm stupid when people ask me that. He asked if I believed in intuition, like a sixth sense kind of thing. I said I guess so. Then he said, "You have good instincts. That is why I picked you. Now I'm not someone who reacts quickly in social situations. Usually I just stand there and process things for like 3 minutes after they happen. But this time I felt something in my stomach twist. I said, 'What do you mean?' And he just smiled and said it was nice talking to you." Then he turned and walked toward the elevator, still tapping his cane on the floor, but again not really using it. I stood there holding this warm can of grape soda, feeling like I had just been part of something, but I could not figure out what. I went home and told my roommate about it, and she was like, maybe he is just partially blind and super practiced navigating the library. That made sense for about 10 seconds until I realized he had never told me he was partially blind. He let me assume. And the more I thought about it, the more little things started popping back into my head. Like how his cane had a rubber tip instead of the usual rollerball kind, and how his backpack had a cracked phone case sticking out of the side pocket. Not like a grift, but something else. Maybe he liked the interaction. Maybe it was some kind of test. That sounds dramatic, but it really stuck with me. I went back to the library 2 days later, during my lunch break, and asked the guy at the front desk if they had a regular who was blind and came in a lot. He said not really. Then I described the man and the cane and the grape soda, and he said, "No, sorry, that does not sound familiar." So I let it go. Or I tried to, but then I started seeing him again, not up close, but at a distance. Once near the bus stop outside the hardware store. Once sitting on a bench at the park near the elementary school. He was always in the same kind of outfit. Sometimes the cane, sometimes not. One time I saw him talking to a woman with a stroller, and she looked confused, but also like she was trying not to be rude. I started wondering if he picked different people each week. If this was just a thing he did, maybe it gave him some kind of comfort. Or maybe he was studying something. He never looked threatening. Just off, calm, but in that way where you know they are thinking a lot more than they are saying. Then one night I was walking home again, same route, same time of year. I had stopped thinking about him as much. I had a new job doing shipping logistics, which paid better and came with health insurance. I was zoning out listening to a podcast about haunted lakes, and all of a sudden a guy stepped out from behind a tree and started following me. Not fast, but deliberate. Sped up. I could hear his footsteps and the little crunch of leaves under his boots. I felt this wave of panic roll up from my chest and into my arms. I turned the corner and was about to run when out of nowhere, someone grabbed my shoulder and I almost screamed. It was him. He just looked at me and said, "Keep walking." I did. He stayed right behind me, and after a minute he said, "We are going to cross the street now." I did not question it. We crossed and kept walking, and after a block, I looked back and the other guy was gone. Just vanished. Maybe he ducked into a yard or turned down a side street. I do not know. The man with the cane said nothing until we reached the intersection near my block, and then he said, "You are still a good pick." I asked him how he knew I was in trouble. He said he saw it coming. He said no, he was just around. Then he turned and walked away. No cane this time, just his hands in his pockets and that weird easy stride. I have not seen him since. That was almost a year ago. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe he was just a guy with some kind of social experiment hobby. But other times I wonder if he really was watching. Not in a creepy way, but in that old guardian angel story kind of way. I still do not like grape soda, but I keep one in the fridge just in case he ever comes back. That is the kind of story that makes you question everything you thought you knew about strangers. At first it feels sketchy, someone pretending to be blind, or at least not telling the full truth. But then he steps in at the exact moment you need help, and suddenly all of that weirdness makes kind of sense, almost like he was supposed to be there. It is unsettling, but also a little comforting in a way. The grape soda detail gets me though. It is such a random anchor for something that feels almost supernatural. You could never explain it to someone without sounding a little unhinged, but you know in your gut that it mattered. And if you think that one is strange, just wait until you hear the next story. I got a job watching a man stare at the ocean, and I don't know if he ever knew I was there. I dropped out of grad school a year ago and started answering Craigslist ads like they were prayers. My bank account had gone into the red for the third time that month, and I was too embarrassed to ask my sister for help again. She had just had her first kid, and I had already borrowed $600. I had no real plan to repay. So, I started applying to every job in the gigs section of Craigslist that did not sound like it would lead directly to organ harvesting. That is how I found the ad. It was titled simply, "Observer Needed. Quiet disposition preferred." The body of the post was short. It said, "Looking for someone to sit on a bench between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. daily and take notes on the activity of an individual. No interaction necessary, must be discreet. Will pay in cash, weekly, email, with a description of your ability to remain unnoticed." That was it. There was no name, no company, no location other than coastal town north of Boston. I replied because it sounded like the kind of nonsense that at least involved sitting outside, and I needed a job that let me work quietly and think about nothing. I told them I was great at going unnoticed, that I had once lived with 3 roommates who forgot I still lived there, and that I had once worked in a funeral home and no one ever spoke to me unless something was leaking. They emailed me back the next day with an address. Just, "Start tomorrow if available." The place was about 40 minutes from where I was staying, a rental room above a retired teacher's garage. I borrowed a bike because my car was still at my friend James's place with a dead battery and 2 parking tickets I was pretending did not exist. When I got to the address, it was just a park on the edge of a beach. Wide green lawn, a few benches facing the water, some kind of monument of the fishermen lost at sea. I had no idea who I was supposed to watch. I picked a bench and sat there feeling stupid and a little hungry and figured I would give it an hour before leaving. About 20 minutes in, this man came down the boardwalk from the parking lot. He was older, maybe late 70s. He walked slowly but deliberately, like he always came here and knew exactly where to go. He sat on the bench directly across from me, maybe 10 feet away, hands in his lap, eyes forward. He looked out at the water like he was trying to read something written just under the waves. I figured maybe this was the guy. I took out a notebook I had brought just in case and started writing down what he did, which was nothing. He sat there for an hour, then 2. At exactly noon, he took a sandwich out of his coat pocket and ate half. Wrapped in wax paper. Tuna salad, from the smell of it. Then he folded the other half back up, slid it back into his coat, and went back to staring. Around 3, he stood up, brushed off his lap, and walked back the way he came. The next day, same thing. I never got confirmation that he was the right person, but no one else ever showed up, and a few days in, I started receiving small manila envelopes taped under the bench I had first sat on. Inside was a wad of cash, 520s. No note, no return address. just the money, always on Friday. Always the exact amount. At first, I kept detailed notes. Arrival time, clothing, behaviour. I noted that he never used his phone, never spoke to anyone, never seemed distracted. He blinked less than I thought was normal. But after a week or two, I stopped writing. There was nothing new to say. He stared at the ocean like he was trying to remember something that no longer existed. Like the water had taken it, and he thought maybe if he just sat long enough, it would give it back. I started bringing coffee. I'd sit a few benches away and sip slowly and read or sketch. He never looked at me. I don't know if he ever noticed I was there, but it started to feel like a routine we both relied on. Like we were ghosts haunting the same spot for different reasons. After 3 weeks, I started recognizing a few regulars. A woman with a greyhound that wore a sweater. A guy who ran laps around the lawn and always stopped to stretch in front of the flagpole. But none of them ever talked to the man. One time, the dog walker's greyhound sniffed his shoe and he didn't move at all. Didn't flinch or smile or reach down. Just stared. I asked the coffee shop guy if he knew who the old man was. He shrugged and said probably a retired professor or someone whose wife died. Said guys like that just end up on benches and no one really knows what to do with them. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. Then one day he didn't show up. I figured maybe he was sick, or went to a doctor's appointment. The next day he wasn't there either, or the next. There was no envelope that Friday. I kept going back for a while, even without the money. Part of me felt like I was going to miss something if I stopped. Like maybe he would come back and sit down and everything would click into place, and I would finally understand why I had been watching him all this time. But he never came back. I stopped going after about 3 weeks. Started doing data entry for a small starter that lasted 6 months before folding. Got a job at a bookstore. Moved out of the rental above the garage and into a place with 2 roommates who label their food and never talk to me. But every now and then, I dream about that bitch. Or I see someone in a tan windbreaker, and for a second I think it is him. I still don't know who paid me, or why. I never felt like I was spying. It felt more like I was guarding something. Like he needed someone there, in case the ocean tried to say something back and he didn't know how to hear it on his own. I kept the notebook. I don't know why. It is mostly empty. A few pages of shaky handwriting and the word still written over and over again in the margins like I forgot what it meant the first time. I don't know. I just thought maybe someone should know he existed, even if I still don't know who he was, or why I was there, or if he even saw me. That one hit different. There is something about the image of a man sitting in front of the ocean every single day, waiting for an answer only he could hear, that just sticks in your chest. It is eerie, but it is also kind of beautiful. You went there thinking it was just a gig, a way to keep the lights on, but it turned into something heavier, almost like you were part of his ritual, even if he never acknowledged you. The envelopes of cash, the silence, the stillness. It feels less like a job, and more like you were keeping watch over a secret no one else knew existed. And since we are already waist-deep in the kind of stories that blur the line between ordinary and unsettling, let us move into the next one. My brother went to space camp and came back with a fake accent that never went away. I felt kind of ridiculous posting this, but it's been bugging me for 15 years, and no one in my family will talk about it anymore. They act like it's totally normal, like nothing happened. But I was there, and I know something shifted. This is probably going to sound petty and small and stupid compared to the heavy stuff people usually post here, but whatever. I need to get it out. Maybe just writing it down will make me feel less crazy. So, I have one sibling, my older brother Noah. He's 2 years ahead of me, which felt like a big deal when we were kids, but now that we're both in our 30s, it barely matters. Growing up, he was always the golden child. Straight A's, science fairs, all that. He wasn't a jerk about it. He just had this way of doing everything right and being effortlessly liked. My mom used to say he was an old soul. She said that about me too, but only when I was being quiet in a corner. This summer, he turned 11. my parents sent him to this fancy space camp in Alabama. The real one. We lived in Connecticut, and I remember being jealous because the furthest I'd ever gone was Lake George. I was 9 that summer, and I mostly spent it watching cartoons in the basement and eating cereal out of the box. I remember being a little scared about him flying down there alone, but he was so chill about it. I watched him pack his bag the night before, and he let me pick out one patch from his collection for him to take. I picked one with a little rocket that said "Aim Higher." I remember that clearly. He was gone for 9 days. When we picked him up from the airport, my mum cried in the parking lot, which embarrassed both of us. He came out of the gate wearing a blue jumpsuit with his name stitched on the chest and a duffel bag covered in pins. He looked taller. Maybe he just stood straighter. He hugged me like I was someone he hadn't seen in years. But the first thing I really noticed was his voice. It was different. Not a lot, just a little. The vowels were off. Softer somehow. And he said "mum" instead of "mom." But I caught it. At first I figured he was copying someone from camp. Kids do that, pick up phrases. But to get going. Over the next few days his whole speech pattern started to shift. He started saying rubbish instead of trash, flat instead of apartment, garage with a soft G. He asked me if I wanted a biscuit when he meant a cookie. It was like he had watched a lot of BBC and decided to commit to the bit. But he never dropped it. Not after a week, not after a month, not ever. My parents noticed, of course. My mum asked him if he had a British roommate at camp. He said, yeah, there were a few international kids. But when I asked to see the group photo, I only recognised a bunch of kids who looked like they lived in Ohio. He pointed to one kid and said, "That's Liam, he's from Manchester." But I swear to God, Liam was wearing a Detroit Pistons hoodie. It was like Noah had decided he was now half British and just rolled with it. He never claimed he was from England. He never faked a backstory. He just slowly started talking like someone who had spent a long time overseas. It wasn't a perfect accent. It slipped sometimes, especially when he got mad. But it was there. Consistent. Natural, almost. The weirdest part is that everyone just accepted it. Teachers, friends, even our grandparents. No one ever really called him out. People would ask where he was from, and he'd say Connecticut, and they'd get confused. He'd just smile like they were the ones who were missing something. I asked him once, about a year after camp, why he still talked that way. He looked at me kind of sideways and said, "This is just how I sound now." Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like nothing had changed. And maybe to him, it hadn't. He leaned into it as we got older. He got cast as the lead in every school play. He started listening to Britpop. He said things like we ought to leave, and I reckon we could. By high school, he had a whole persona built around it. People called him the professor. Girls liked it. Teachers liked it. He got invited to things I didn't even know were happening. Meanwhile, I started mumbling more, unsure of how to say anything without sounding like I was imitating someone. We'd sit around the dinner table, and I'd feel like I was visiting someone else's family. By the time he went to college, it was fully baked in. His voice was just his voice. When he called home, my mum would still get a little dreamy. She'd say, "Your brother has the nicest phone voice." I started calling it the space camp accent. No one laughed. The thing is, Noah never gave me a reason to hate him. He was always kind. He never made me feel dumb. He bought me a hoodie from his school and mailed it with a handwritten note. He once made me a playlist called Songs for When You Feel Like You're Living Underground. I still have it. But I never stopped feeling like he took something and didn't give it back. Like he got off that plane with a new version of himself and I was supposed to pretend it had always been there. We are both adults now. He lives in Seattle and works in tech. We talk maybe once a month. His voice is still the same, subtle but unmistakable. He swears he has no idea what I mean when I bring it up. He laughs and says, "I always was the imaginative one." My parents nod along. My dad says, "Let the man talk how he wants." My mum says maybe he watched too much. Monty Python. I had a dream a few months ago where I was back in the basement eating dry cereal, and Noah came down the stairs in that blue jumpsuit. He sat next to me and we watched cartoons and didn't talk. Then he turned to me and said, "It never went away, you just forgot what it was like before." I woke up feeling like I had swallowed a penny. So yeah, that's it. Nothing dramatic, just a voice that changed and never changed back. I don't even know what I want from posting this. Maybe I just want to know if anyone else has ever had someone in their life transform like that, so slowly and convincingly that the original version of them starts to feel made up. Or maybe I just want someone to say, "Yeah, that's weird, you're not imagining it." Because sometimes I hear myself in recordings and I swear I'm starting to sound like him. That is so unsettling, because it is not like he came back from camp a different person in the obvious ways. He did not change his name or pretend to be from another country. He just shifted the tiniest detail, his voice, and somehow it changed everything. It is almost creepier that everyone around him just went along with it, like reality bent to match whatever he decided. And you are left holding the memory of what he used to sound like, wondering if you imagined it. That dream you had feels like the kicker too. It is like he knows exactly what happened, but refuses to admit it out loud. Alright, let us move on to the next story. I used to steal eggs from a stranger's chicken coop, and now I send her birthday cards. I don't think I've ever told anyone this. Or maybe I did once at a party when I was drunk and nobody was really listening. I don't know. It happened in that weird stretch of time between the end of college and the start of anything else. I had just moved back in with my dad after graduation, which I swore I would never do. He lived in a small house on a hill outside a nowhere town with one gas station and no streetlights. I was working at a diner about 20 minutes away, bussing tables and restocking the coffee bar, trying not to think about the fact that my anthropology degree was now being used to expertly arrange condiment packets. My dad worked long shifts as a night janitor at the high school I went to, and when he wasn't working, he mostly sat in his chair with the TV on mute, reading war memoirs and drinking beer from a frosted mug he kept in the freezer. We got along fine, not close. Just quietly functional. There was always bread and peanut butter in the kitchen. He paid the bills and I cleaned the bathroom. I think we were both waiting for me to get it together enough to leave again. Anyway, the egg thing started in early spring. I had this habit of walking after work. The diner closed at 3 and I'd get home around 4. Change into jeans, and head out along this gravel road that led behind the property and eventually forked off into woods. I didn't go far, just enough to feel like I was somewhere else. It helped to shake the smell of fryer grease and bleach from my brain. About a mile in there was this house, pale green with white trim. The kind of place that looks like it's been standing exactly the same way since 1972. Out front was a faded lawn flamingo, and on the porch there was always a blue enamel kettle sitting on the railing, even in the rain. But what I noticed first was the chicken coop. It was tucked off to the side behind a lilac bush, maybe 6 or 7 hens scratching around in the dirt. The coop looked homemade, like someone had built it from scraps and stubbornness. But it was solid. A little run with a chicken wire fence, a sloped roof, a small door that stayed cracked open during the day. I never saw anyone tending to it. Just the chickens, plucking and stomping like they ran the place. I don't know what possessed me to do it the first time. I swear it wasn't premeditated. I had been walking the same route for maybe 2 weeks. I always passed the coop and looked in. One day, there was a hen sitting half out of the door, and right behind her, just sitting in the dirt, was a perfect brown egg. I stood there for a second, then looked around like I was about to rob a bank. No one in sight. The house was quiet. I reached through the fence and picked up the egg, warm and heavier than I expected. Slipped it into my hoodie pocket and kept walking. Back home, I fried it in butter and ate it on toast, and it tasted like every other egg I had ever had. Maybe a little fresher. Maybe not. But something about it felt different. Like I'd discovered a secret snack cabinet in a stranger's kitchen. I did it again the next day, and then again. It became a routine. I would walk by, check the coop, see if there were any eggs that had rolled out into the open. I never went inside. I never took more than one, just what I could reach. And I only ever did it when it seemed like nobody was home. There was no car in the driveway and the porch light was off. A few weeks in, I started noticing details. The house had wind chimes shaped like spoons. The mailbox had peeling stickers that spelled out B, and then something worn off. One of the chickens had a limp, and I started calling her Bossy. She was mean and pecked at the others. I once found a feather with this weird iridescent sheen and stuck it in the pages of a book I was pretending to read. I felt weirdly close to them, like they were my chickens, even though I was literally stealing from them. Then one day, someone was on the porch. She was older. Not old. Maybe 60s. Long grey braid down her back, denim overalls, bare feet. She was sitting on a camp chair shelling peas into a mixing bowl. I froze halfway down the road. I thought about turning back, but I'd already been seen. She looked up, gave me a once-over, then went back to her peas. I gave a little wave. She nodded, just barely. I kept walking. Didn't stop at the coop. Felt my ears go hot. That night, I dreamed she had left a note for me in the dirt. It said, "Take one more and I'll feed you to the rooster." I woke up laughing and also kind of sick to my stomach. The next few times I walked, she wasn't there. I avoided the coop. I told myself I was done, that it had been dumb anyway, but I couldn't stop looking. One afternoon, I noticed a basket tied to the outside of the coop with a little cloth inside. Sitting in it were 2 eggs, clean. Just waiting. It felt like a trap. I didn't touch them. The next day, same thing. 2 eggs in the basket, no sign of her. On the 3rd day, I took one, left the other. Whispered thank you under my breath like a lunatic. That became the new routine. She would leave 1 or 2 eggs in the basket every couple of days. Sometimes there was a sprig of parsley or a little purple flower tucked next to them. I never saw her again on the porch, but once I thought I heard humming from inside the house. I wanted to, but I didn't know how. Summer came and I got a new job working the night shift at a warehouse. The walk stopped. I slept during the day, ate standing up, and only saw the sky through break room windows. When I finally went back out to that road in September, the coop was empty. No chickens. The fence was sagging. The basket was gone. The house looked the same, but smaller somehow. I stood there longer than I meant to. Then I left. I kept thinking about her, wondering if she had moved, or if the chickens had died. If she had ever really been there. Part of me felt like I had imagined the whole thing, like I had dreamed her into the landscape. That winter, I sent a card. Just a blank one with a picture of a chicken on the front. Inside I wrote, "Thank you for the eggs." I never signed it. I just addressed it to the house with the green paint and the flamingo out front. I didn't know if it would get delivered. I didn't even know her name. 3 weeks later I got a card back. A tiny envelope with handwriting like someone used to writing in cursive. Inside was a piece of paper that just said, "You're welcome." And below that, in smaller letters, her name. Bernice. Since then, we've exchanged cards twice a year. My birthday and hers. No long letters. Just little notes. Happy spring. If you're eating well. Once she sent me a drawing of a chicken wearing boots. I still don't know much about her. I don't even know if she's still at that house. Last year the card came from a different address, still in the same town. No explanation, just the card and her name and the same careful penmanship. Sometimes I think about knocking on her door, just showing up and saying, "Hi, I was the idiot who kept stealing eggs from your coop. Thank you for not calling the cops. Thank you for not making it weird." But I probably won't. Some things feel better when they stay slightly out of reach. I don't steal anymore, not eggs or anything else. I have a job at a co-op now, and I can afford to buy pasture-raised if I feel like being fancy. But every time I crack one open, I think about that first one. Warm from the co-op, sitting in my pocket. A little stolen, a little gifted. I still have the feather in the book. I never finished reading it. That one feels different from the others, quieter but in a way that sticks. I like how it started with you sneaking eggs like it was nothing, and it turned into this little unspoken bond. It is funny how something so small can grow into a ritual that actually matters. You were just trying to get by, and she met you halfway without ever saying a word. The basket, the cards, even the feather you kept, they make it feel like you were both carrying a piece of each other's life. It reminds me of how sometimes the smallest connections end up being the ones that last. The next story is not about eggs, but it has that same feeling of something small spiraling into something unforgettable. My neighbour keeps asking me to lie to her husband, and I don't know how to say no. I moved into this apartment complex 3 months ago after my divorce. It's a basic 2-bedroom unit in a beige building that looks exactly like every other apartment complex built in the early 2000s. I didn't choose it because I liked it. I chose it because it was available and close enough to my job that I could still bike there if my car finally gave out. I told myself it was temporary, but I signed a year lease and I'm still here. There's a couple with a toddler below me and someone who plays cello late at night across the courtyard. But for the most part, people keep to themselves. Except for the woman in 3B. Her name is Tracy. I know that because she introduced herself the second I stepped out of the moving truck. She had a soda in her hand and a dog on a leash, and she said, "Hey there, welcome to the party," like we were already friends. She's the kind of woman who talks to everyone. She calls the maintenance guy by name and always knows which units are being fumigated and who just broke up with who. I liked her immediately and also knew I should keep a little distance, just in case. Tracy lives with her husband Mike, who I didn't meet for the first 2 weeks. She told me he works nights and keeps weird hours, and that I'd probably never see him unless something broke. She said it like a joke, but something about the way she said it stuck with me. When I did finally meet him, it was because my bike lock got jammed and I was cursing at it in the parking lot. Mike came over with a pair of bolt cutters and said nothing except here, and then walked away after it was done. He's one of those big, quiet men who never smiles and makes you feel like you're in trouble even when you're not. I said thank you and he just nodded. A few days later, Tracy knocked on my door. It was around 8 at night, and I was eating leftover rice out of the container while watching videos on my phone. She asked if I could do her a tiny favour. I said sure before she explained, because that's what you do when someone lives 12 feet away from you and knows your name. She said Mike had just gotten home and thought she had been at her sister's all afternoon. She had actually gone shopping and then to lunch with a friend he didn't like. She asked if I'd say I'd seen her around too, maybe coming back from the store, just something casual in case he asked. I said okay. I didn't think much of it. People lie to their partners all the time, small stuff. Sometimes just to avoid a fight. I figured maybe Mike was controlling or just annoying about how she spent her time. And it wasn't like I had to lie to his face, she just wanted me to be a backup story. But then she came by again a few days later. This time she said she needed me to confirm she'd been home all morning in case Mike came looking. She said she'd left her phone inside and went out with her cousin and didn't want to deal with the questions. You said it like she was borrowing sugar, or casual, no big deal. I said sure again, but I started to feel uneasy. Not because I thought she was cheating, I honestly didn't care. It was more the way she assumed I'd say yes, like it was already decided, like I was part of something whether I wanted to be or not. It kept happening. Once a week, sometimes twice. She'd knock, usually in the evening, always with that same smile. She'd ask if I could cover for her. Sometimes it was just vague. Tell him I saw her heading to the pool. Say she was in the laundry room. Say we talked about a movie. At first I kept saying yes because I didn't know how to say no. I didn't want to make it awkward. I told myself it wasn't serious. She was probably just trying to avoid drama. But then one night she knocked and looked different. Her hair was messed up and her eyes were red, and she asked if I could come over for a minute. I followed her without asking. She closed the door behind us and locked it, then sat down on the couch and started crying. She said Mike had gone through her phone, that he had found messages from someone named Daniel, that he had screamed at her for 2 hours and then left. She said she didn't know if he was coming back. She said she was scared. I asked if she wanted to call someone. She said no. I asked if she wanted to leave. She said she didn't know. Then she looked at me and said if he asks, tell him we were together on Sunday. That we went to the flea market, got lunch. She said it quickly, like she was trying to get it out before she changed her mind. I didn't answer right away. She looked at me with this tired expression and said please. So I nodded. She stopped crying after that, said thank you, and walked me to the door. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the bolt cutters, about the way Mike stood with his arms crossed like he was trying to shrink the world down to just the part he could control. I wondered what it was like to live with someone who made you scared to admit where you'd been. The next time I saw Mike, he nodded at me in the parking lot. I nodded back and wondered if he had already decided I was lying. Tracy didn't come by for almost 2 weeks after that. I figured maybe they worked things out. Or maybe he left. But then she knocked again, and this time she had a bruise on her arm that looked like a thumbprint. She didn't mention it. Just smiled and asked if I could say she had been with me that afternoon. I said yes, but my voice sounded strange to my own ears. After she left, I sat on my couch for an hour without moving. Then I got up and looked up shelters in the area. I wrote a number on a post-it note and stuck it to her door. The next morning it was gone. The next time she came by, she didn't mention the note. She asked if I could cover for her again. I hesitated. I told her I didn't feel comfortable lying anymore, that I thought she might be in danger, that maybe she should talk to someone. She smiled, but it was different this time. Smaller. She said she understood, said she didn't mean to drag me into anything, said she was just tired. She hasn't come by since. I still see her sometimes walking the dog or getting the mail. She waves, but we don't talk. Mike still nods at me when we pass. I still don't know what I should have done. I keep replaying it, wondering if I should have pushed harder. Called someone. Said no the first time, but it never felt big enough in the moment, just little lies, little covers. I don't know what's happening in that apartment now. I don't hear anything through the walls. But I think about her almost every day. I still have the post-it note. I put it back on my fridge, just in case. That one feels heavy in a very real way. It starts with these little favors that seem harmless, the kind of thing you agree to because it feels easier than saying no. But then the lies start piling up and suddenly you're part of something that feels dangerous, even if you never meant to be. What gets me is how small the moments are when they happen. A knock on the door, a quick request, a nod in the parking lot. None of it looks like a turning point until you realize you are in the middle of it. And the worst part is not knowing what the right move would have been. You wanted to help, you did not want to abandon her, but you also knew the line between helping and being swallowed up in someone else's chaos. That tension is so familiar. Before I ramble too long, let's see what else I got for you. I took a job at a storage facility and found something. I can't forget I was broke when I got the job. Not the quirky kind of broke where you're choosing between oat milk and rent, but still going to rooftop parties. I mean the kind of broke where you spend 20 minutes in a gas station parking lot deciding whether to put your last $8 in your tank or buy food. I've been couch surfing for 3 months, working part-time at a gas station with a manager who looked like he hated dogs and said stuff like work ethic is a choice while texting during his entire shift. Anyway, one day I saw a job posting on a telephone pole of all places. I was walking back from the laundromat, hands still damp in my backpack, and there it was. Evening help needed at storage facility. Quiet, reliable, good for students. A phone number with one of those tear-off tabs. I took one and called it as soon as I got near a place with signal. The guy who answered sounded surprised, like he had forgotten the ad existed. He asked if I could come by that evening. No interview, no paperwork, just come see the place. So I did. The facility was on the edge of town, past where the road gets cracked and there's more weeds than sidewalk. The sign out front just said, EZ Store It, in faded red letters. No fence. One main building with an office and a coffee machine that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the late 90s. rows and rows of metal units behind it, stretching back toward a line of trees. The man who greeted me was named Lloyd. He was in his 60s, beard like a tangled mop, and one of those voices that sounded half asleep. He didn't ask me any questions except if I was the type to steal, and I said no, which apparently was enough. He said he needed someone to sit in the office from 6 to midnight, keep an eye on the monitors, and walk the rows once an hour. That was it. $7 an hour, cash every Friday. I started the next night. It was boring work, which was perfect. I brought books, downloaded podcasts, even started sketching again. The place had a weird peace to it. Nothing ever happened. A few customers would stop by in the first hour or two, mostly older folks checking on junk they probably forgot they even owned. After that, it was just me and the hum of the lights and the soft static of the monitor feed. For the first few weeks, everything was routine. Then, around week 4, I started noticing something odd. There was a unit all the way in the back, number 1.7. I walked past it every night during my rounds. It was unremarkable, just like all the others, except for the fact that it was always padlocked with an extra chain, one of those thick rusted ones you see on bike racks downtown. That wasn't strange in itself. What was strange was that every time I passed it, I felt like I could hear something inside. It wasn't loud. A faint scuffling, maybe. Once I thought I heard a kind of wet thump. Another time it was like whispering, but too soft to make out words. I wrote it off as animals. Maybe raccoons had gotten in through a vent. It was an old place, nothing worked perfectly. But it started to bother me. I started lingering outside that unit, holding my breath, leaning in. One night I pressed my ear against the metal door. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I was trying to make it real. What I heard was a voice, clear as anything. It said, "Help me, just once." Very soft. A woman's voice. I jumped back like I'd been burned. I looked around. The row was empty. The air was dead still. I stood there for a long time. My flashlight started to flicker, so I went back inside. The next day I told Lloyd. Not about the voice, just about the sounds. Said maybe there were raccoons or something in one of the units. He didn't even look up from his crossword. Just said 147's paid up through the end of the year and nobody goes in or out. I asked if we should check inside. He said nope. Owners got it triple locked and left strict instructions. Some people store weird stuff, not our job to care. That was it. End of discussion. I should have let it go. I really should have. But I couldn't. Every night I found myself walking slower as I got near that unit, standing a little longer, listening. I started dreaming about it, waking up with the image of a pair of hands pressed against the inside of the door. Then one night it was unlocked, not wide open, just the padlock hanging loose, the chain on the ground. The door was still shut, but it wasn't sealed. I stood there staring at it for what felt like forever. I should have called Lloyd. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I pulled the door open. Inside was a chair. That was it. A wooden chair, worn down in the middle of the unit. No boxes, no lights. Just a chair, and the smell of dust and something sweet and rotting. I stepped inside, shined my flashlight around. The beam hit every corner. It was definitely empty. The chair wasn't even facing the door. Just turned slightly, like someone had been sitting there watching the back wall. I backed out slowly, pulled the door down, left the lock off, went back to the office and sat in the chair with my hands shaking. I told myself I'd hallucinated the voice, that maybe the unit had always just been a storage spot for a chair, and my brain was playing tricks on me. The next night, the lock was back on, tight, chain wrapped 3 times. Everything looked exactly as it had before. I never told Lloyd. I didn't go back in. I never heard the voice again. But every now and then, when I passed it, I thought I could feel someone watching me from the inside. I quit the job a few weeks later. Told Lloyd I got a better offer, which was a lie. I just couldn't keep going there. I couldn't keep standing in front of that unit, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing or if someone had really sat in that chair and whispered for help. That was almost a year ago. Sometimes I drive by the place just to see if it's still there. The sign is more faded. The front window is cracked now. I haven't gone inside. But I think about it every night. That quiet voice, that empty chair. The way the lock was off, just once, like someone wanted to be found and gave up. I don't know what I was supposed to do. I don't know if I failed someone, or if I saved myself by walking away. I don't expect this to make sense. I just needed to put it somewhere. Maybe that's all we can do with things we don't understand. Give them shape. Let them breathe outside our heads for a minute. And then shut the door. Leave the lock off. Walk away. That one gave me chills. It is not even the chair itself. It is the way you describe the build-up. The sounds, the chain, the one night it was left open. You spend so much time wondering if you are imagining it, and then when you finally look, it almost feels worse that there is nothing there. Just an empty room holding the weight of everything you thought you heard. I think anyone would carry that with them. It is the kind of thing you cannot explain, so your brain just keeps circling it, trying to make sense of something that might not ever make sense. Alright, let's move on to the next story. I'm pretty sure I drove a dead man to a payphone in Montana. This happened 5 years ago, and I still don't have a normal way to tell the story. Every time I try, I either start laughing because it sounds fake, or get all weird and quiet halfway through and change the subject. The closest I've come to understanding it is just accepting that I'll never understand it. But I think about it almost every day, especially when I pass payphones. Which, yeah, there are still a few out here. Montana is big like that. Empty enough that old things don't get replaced. Just ignored. I was 29 and working a kind of nothing job that paid just enough for gas and groceries. I picked up seasonal ranch work in the summers, and in the winters I bounced between delivery gigs and helping out at a friend's auto shop. The winter this happened, I was driving for a courier service that mostly delivered meds and legal documents between hospitals, nursing homes, and small-town law offices. I had a rust-coloured Subaru with a cracked windshield and no heat, and I spent a lot of time talking to myself or yelling at the radio when the AM station cut out in the mountains. It was late January. A Wednesday, I think. The sun had gone down by the time I left the little clinic in Thompson Falls. I had dropped off a cooler of blood samples and picked up a sealed envelope that had to go to a firm in Missoula before midnight. The drive should have taken just under 3 hours, but I had an oil light blinking and a growing suspicion that I had left my wallet at the gas station where I'd bought jerky and a Mountain Dew. Not the best start to a long, cold night. About 20 minutes out of town, somewhere near Plains, I saw a guy walking along the side of the road. Just walking, slow and steady like he had been doing it a while. He was wearing a long coat and one of those knit hats with flaps that hang down by your ears. No bag, no flashlight, no thumb out. Just moving. Normally I wouldn't stop. I'm not proud of that, but I've had a couple bad experiences and I try not to take chances. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he looked straight ahead instead of at me. Like he didn't care if anyone stopped. Or maybe it was just the cold and the dark and the idea of walking alone in it that made me pull over and roll down the window. "You headed somewhere specific?" I asked. He turned his head slowly, like the movement cost something. Then he said, "Need to make a call." I said I could take him into town, drop him at a diner or something with a phone. He just nodded and got in the car. Here's the first weird thing. He didn't smell like anything. No sweat, no cold air, not even the faint motor oil smell most people get from their coats this time of year. Just nothing. I didn't notice it right away, but later it hit me. He didn't smell like anything at all. We didn't talk much. I asked him his name and he said Daniel, no last name. No other details. He asked if I'd ever been to Great Falls. I said no, just driven past. He nodded, like that meant something, and went quiet again. I tried the radio. He didn't react. About 15 minutes later, just outside Hot Springs, he suddenly said, "There's a phone up here, next to the grain elevators." I said okay, figuring he meant one of those weird rural holdouts where someone had just never taken the payphone down. And sure enough, as we turned the corner, there it was. One of those old metal booths with the folding door, lit by a single yellow bulb that somehow still worked. I don't know how I missed it before. I'd driven that road 100 times, never noticed it. And Daniel said thanks, opened the door, and got out. I watched him walk to the phone and pick up the receiver like he'd done it every day of his life. I sat there with the engine idling, watching. He didn't put any coins in, he just stood there with the phone to his ear. After maybe 2 minutes, he nodded once, then hung up and walked back to the car. I didn't say anything when he got in. He said, "Thanks for the ride," then looked straight ahead. We drove in silence for another 5 minutes. Then he said, "You should pull over up ahead." I looked at him, and he looked back at me, and I swear to God his eyes were different. Not scary or blowing, or anything dramatic, just older. Sadder. Like he had remembered something while making that call, and now he was somewhere else entirely. I pulled over. He got out without another word and walked into the trees. I watched until I couldn't see him anymore. I waited maybe 20 minutes. Got out. Called into the woods. Nothing. Finally, I just left. I made my delivery on time. Didn't tell anyone about the guy. What would I even say? The next day, I drove back to that stretch of road. The payphone wasn't there. Not just broken or vandalized. Just gone. Just gone. No booth, no pole, no wires, no tire tracks where Daniel had walked. I asked around in Hot Springs. No one remembered a phone out there. The grain elevators hadn't been used in years. Someone said there used to be a phone in town back in the early 2000s, but it had been pulled out when the gas station closed. I checked with the courier company, asked if anyone had reported a missing person or anything unusual the night before. Nothing. I even went online. Search for obituaries, missing persons, anything connected to a Daniel in Great Falls. Found a couple possibilities, but none that made sense. None that looked like the man I met. So I let it go. Or tried to. But sometimes, on long drives late at night, I'll think about that call. What he said. Whether he ever really existed in the way I understood. And sometimes I wonder if maybe I'll see him again, walking along some other stretch of road, headed for a phone that isn't there until it is. I keep a few quarters in the glove box now, just in case. That one sticks in a way that is hard to shake. It is not scary in the classic sense, but it crawls under your skin because there is no way to explain it. A man who barely spoke, who did not seem fully there, asking for a payphone that nobody else remembers. Then it is just gone, like the whole thing folded itself back up. I think that is the kind of memory that comes back to you in quiet moments, when you are driving alone or passing something ordinary like a phone booth, and suddenly you feel that same question again. Was he real, or was I just in the middle of something I was never supposed to understand? And I get why you keep quarters in the car now. It is like leaving the door cracked, just in case the world gets strange again. Alright, let's keep it moving and see what the next story brings. I was hired to watch an empty lot for 1 week, and I still don't know what I was actually watching. I took the job because it was money, and I was already 3 weeks behind on rent. The Craigslist ad said they needed someone to do light security work, no experience necessary, 7 nights from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The location was listed as a vacant property outside of town, and the description said, "Monitor for activity." The rate was $30 an hour under the table, paid in cash at the end of the week. It sounded sketchy, obviously, but I was desperate and they responded quickly, so I told them yes. The guy who met me on the first night showed up in a silver pickup and didn't get out of the cab. I walked up to the passenger window and he passed me a manila folder with a short contract, a map of the lot, and a laminated sheet with a list of things I wasn't allowed to do. The list included stuff like no fires, no guests, and no photos. He told me I'd be alone out there, that my job was to stay in the chair, keep the generator running, and write down anything I saw or heard in the logbook that was already set up in the trailer. I asked if I should be looking for trespassers or animals or what. He just said, anything unusual. Then he drove off. The trailer was tiny, like one of those single-room job site things. Inside, there was a folding chair, a table with a couple lanterns, a metal thermos labelled coffee, even though it was empty, and the logbook. No windows, but the door faced the lot. and there was a motion light set up on a pole outside that turned on every time I opened the door. The lot itself was completely empty. No structures. Just a flattened gravel pad surrounded by woods on 3 sides and a chain-link fence with a padlocked gate on the 4th. According to the map, it used to be some kind of shipping depot, but it had been cleared and the land was in limbo. They were either going to sell it or start building again. Nothing about it looked special. The first night was boring. I walked the perimeter once at midnight, wrote in the logbook that everything was quiet, then sat in the trailer eating pretzels from my backpack and wondering if I was going to get murdered by a meth head. The light kept flicking on outside, probably bugs or wind, but every time it did, I'd get a jolt like I was about to see someone standing there. I didn't though. It stayed quiet. The air was thick and damp. I stayed awake by reading some old sci-fi on my phone and left when the sun came up. Night 2 was the same, except around 2:30 I heard something that sounded like a whistle, not a person, not like someone calling a dog, just a high pitch, rising and falling once, and then silence. It came from the trees. I walked over but didn't see anything. No animals, no movement. I wrote it down in the logbook under audio anomaly. That phrase was printed in bold at the top of every page, which I hadn't noticed before. By the 3rd night I was tired. I brought a thermos of real coffee, popped myself in the chair, and just zoned out. Around 4, I saw lights in the trees. Not flashlights. More like glows. Pale and slow, pulsing in a way that didn't make sense. I stepped outside and the light flicked on, and the glow disappeared. I stood there listening but didn't hear anything. Not even bugs. Just stillness, like the kind that presses against your ears underwater. I went back inside and didn't write anything down. On night 4, I showed up and the trailer door was already open. I was sure I'd locked it. Nothing was moved inside. The thermos was still empty. The logbook was still on the table. But a new page had been started. It said, in blocky letters, nothing to report. No initials, no timestamp. I sat there for an hour, just looking at that line. Then I flipped back and checked my previous entries. They were still there. Still mine. I checked the lock on the inside of the trailer. Tried it a few times, but it was working fine. At that point I should have left, or at least called the number I'd been given in case of emergency. No lights, no whistle, just cold wind and the distant sound of a car somewhere off in the hills. But I kept looking at the trees. I kept waiting. Night 5. Lights came back. This time they were closer. Not in the trees, but on the ground, right at the edge of the gravel. They didn't look like anything I'd seen before. Not flares, not lanterns. Just these soft yellow shapes, like they were being held, but without anything to hold them. I opened the trailer door and stood in the light, but nothing moved. I called out, and my own voice sounded wrong. Dull and slow. Then I saw someone, a shape really. Just standing at the edge of the lot, facing the trailer. No features, no clothes I could make out. Just the shape of a person and the glint of eyes in the motion light. I blinked and they were gone. I wrote it down in the logbook. My hand was shaking. I didn't leave the trailer again that night. By the 6th night I was wrecked, barely sleeping, constantly replaying things in my head. I brought a knife, just a pocket blade, and kept it open on the table beside me. I wasn't sure what I thought it would do. I just needed to have something. Nothing happened until just after 3. Then the light came on and there was someone standing in the lot. They didn't move. I stayed in the trailer, watching through the slit in the door. It wasn't the same shape as before. This one looked different. Too tall, arms too long. I kept telling myself it was just a person, just some local messing with me. But the way they stood completely still, no sway, no breath, it felt wrong. They stayed there for 10 minutes. Then they turned and walked into the woods. No sound, no light, gone. I didn't write anything down. I just waited for dawn and left as soon as the sky turned grey. The last night, I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside the gate for a full hour, engine running. But something made me get out. Maybe I needed to finish it. I'd never sleep again. The trailer was locked. The thermos was gone. So was the logbook. Inside, on the table, was a manila envelope with my name on it. Inside was a stack of 20s, exactly $1,680, and a note. It said, "Thank you for your time." I never heard from the guy in the pickup again. Never saw the ad reposted. The lot got fenced off more permanently a few months later. Someone built a warehouse there last year. I haven't been back. I still think about it, especially when I see lights in the woods. Or when I walk past construction sites at night and catch a shape out of the corner of my eye. I don't know what I was watching. I don't think I was supposed to understand it. But I think something watched me back. Man, that job sounds like the kind of thing you take, thinking it'll just be easy money, and then it crawls under your skin forever. I can picture you sitting in that trailer, trying to convince yourself it's nothing, but every night, it's a little stranger. The whistle, the lights, the handwriting that wasn't yours. By the time those shapes started showing up, I don't know how you kept walking back in there. And then the envelope at the end, with the exact cash and a thank you like it was all normal. That part gets me. Like somebody knew exactly what they were doing, and you were just a piece of it. Anyway, what's the next story? The Airbnb had a locked room and I was not supposed to ask about it. I had not been planning to travel, but I got laid off and couldn't sit in my apartment anymore. Everything felt thick and loud in that space. The way the faucet dripped, the sound of the upstairs neighbour's footsteps, the silence that came after clicking submit on all those job applications. I had some savings and no real obligations, and I thought if I didn't go somewhere soon, I was going to break something on purpose. So I found this listing. An old house in upstate New York. Not an acute tourist town either, just tucked off some county road near a closed-down nursery and a tractor repair place. The photos were all sort of yellow and dim, like the person who took them didn't wait for good light. It wasn't charming, it was just honest. And cheap. But I didn't care. I'd booked it for a week. The woman who met me at the house had 2 names on the listing, but only gave me one. I don't remember which it was now. She had short hair and one of those soft-spoken voices that makes you lean in to hear better, even though she's not really saying anything important. She showed me around, like she was doing it for the first time too. Said things like, the water gets warm eventually and the neighbours aren't close enough to hear you scream, just kidding. Then she stopped at the last door in the hall, jiggled the knob to show it was locked and said, "Just storage, don't worry about it." She said it fast, like a reflex. I was already halfway back to the kitchen when I realized the door had 5 locks on it. 1 at the knob, 2 deadbolts, 1 sliding bolt, and 1 chain. All closed. I asked if there were animals or something in there. She smiled like I had told a joke, but didn't answer. Then she left. I didn't unpack for 2 days. I just lived out of my bag, ate cereal from the box, and took slow walks down the shoulder of the road while listening to music that reminded me of people I no longer talked to. The house felt like it hadn't been lived in for years. There were books with names I didn't recognize, and a closet full of wire hangers, but no coats. The water did get warm eventually. The toilet took forever to fill back up. I wasn't sleeping well. Not because of noise, just something in my body wouldn't settle. Like my nerves hadn't noticed I had left the city. Kept having this dream where I was walking down a hallway that bent, slowly left, and never ended. The dream always ended the same way, with me realizing the walls were getting closer, and then waking up just before they touched. On the 3rd night, I woke up because I heard something metal. I lay in bed with my eyes open, listening. It was a click, then another, then silence. The next morning I checked the hallway. All the locks were still closed. I told myself it was the pipes, or maybe a hinge shifting as the wood cooled overnight. But that night I brought a chair into the hall and sat there with a blanket and a thermos of tea. I didn't really think anything would happen. I just wanted to prove to myself that it was all nothing, that I was projecting. that the door was locked and would stay locked, and I could go back to being alone with myself without building some fantasy about a mystery behind a door. I must have dozed off. I remember hearing a low scraping sound and opening my eyes. It was maybe 4 in the morning. The hallway smelled different, not bad, just wrong, like metal and old books. All the locks were still in place, but I could hear something behind the door. Breathing, slow, deep, like someone asleep on the other side. I did not move for a long time. When the sun came up, the sound was gone. I took a walk that lasted 2 hours. Thought about packing up and leaving, but the house felt sticky in my brain. Like if I left, I'd still carry it with me, so I stayed. I didn't sleep in the hallway again. The fridge motor would whine in a low tone every 3 hours. A crack appeared on the bathroom mirror, even though I hadn't touched it. I wrote it all down in the back pages of a paperback I found in the living room. On the 5th day, I left the house for most of the afternoon, and when I came back, the chair that had been in the hallway was gone. Just gone. No scrape marks on the floor, no sound of it falling over. I checked every room. Nothing. I texted the owner and asked if she had stopped by. She said no, and asked if I needed anything. I said never mind. That night I sat on the floor near the door and tried to talk to whatever was behind it. I didn't say anything dramatic, I just said hi. Said I didn't mean to be weird. I was just visiting. There was no answer. But the breathing came back. Not faster, not louder, just closer. I got up and went to bed. I dreamed I was inside the locked room and the room had no corners. Everything curved slightly. The walls were covered in hundreds of handprints, but all of them were smaller than mine. When I woke up, my hands smelled like dust. On the last day, I walked into the hall and all the locks were open. Every single one. The door was still closed, but loose. Not swinging, just not latched. I stood there for a long time. Then I reached out and closed it. Did not lock it. I left the house that evening, dropped the key through the mail slot. Didn't text the owner. A week later, I got an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was the paperback I had been writing in. The back pages had been torn out. The rest of the book was untouched. I do not know how anyone got my address. I hadn't given it to anyone connected with the trip. I do not know why the pages were removed. I only know that I still dream of that hallway, still feel the curve in my feet when I turn a corner too fast. Still hear that slow breathing sometimes when everything else is quiet. And I still check behind every closed door, even the ones I'm not supposed to open. That story makes my skin crawl in such a quiet way, not because of jump scares or anything obvious, but because it is just you and that door and the not knowing. The locks, the breathing, the chair disappearing, even the envelope later. It is all small enough that you could try to explain it away, but put together it feels impossible to ignore. I think the part that hits me most is when you found all the locks undone and still chose to close the door instead of opening it. That says everything. Some part of you knew you did not want to see what was inside, and honestly, I get it. Sometimes, the not knowing is easier to live with than the answer. Anyway, let's move on to the next story. I told a lie 6 years ago and I think it's still living somewhere in my house. There's not really a clear way to explain this, and I've rewritten the first paragraph 5 times already, so I'm just going to start somewhere and hope it gets better. I live alone. That's the one thing I'm sure about. I live alone, and I've lived alone in this house for a little over 6 years now. I bought it after my dad died. Left me just enough that I could make a down payment on a small 2-bedroom off Route 6 with a crooked porch and a back shed that smells like mice no matter what I do. I was 24 when I moved in. It was a big deal at the time. Everyone thought I was jumping the gun, but I didn't care. I was tired of renting. I wanted to be rooted somewhere. The weird part starts maybe 6 months after I moved in. I had a friend from college staying with me. We hadn't talked in a long time, but she was driving across the country and needed a place to crash for a few nights, and it seemed like the kind of thing I should say yes to. Her name was Dana. She always carried one of those canvas bags that looked like it had been dipped in coffee. and it clinked when she walked because of all the keys and pins and stuff she kept inside. One night we were sitting on the back porch, drinking beer and watching a raccoon try to open my compost bin, and she asked if I ever felt like the house had already had someone in it. I said like ghosts, and she said no, like personality. Like maybe it belonged to someone who just forgot to take their presents with them. I laughed because it sounded like something she'd say. She was always kind of floaty and poetic, and it didn't strike me as weird at the time. I told her the house had been empty for almost a year before I moved in. I told her I was the first one to live in it after they renovated. But that wasn't true. I don't know why I said that. I knew it wasn't true. The agent had told me a man lived here before me. His name was Arthur. He died in the living room. Natural causes. Alone. They didn't find him for 4 days. I remember that clearly because I asked if the carpet had been replaced, and the agent said, yeah, they had to. But I told Dana it had been empty. I don't know if I was trying to make her more comfortable or trying to make myself feel less like I was living in someone else's air. She left the next morning, sent me a postcard from Nevada a few weeks later, and I never heard from her again. A couple months after that, the light in the hallway started flickering. I replaced the bulb twice and it still did it, only at night, only when I was walking past. Then the floor in the second bedroom started creaking. Just one specific board, always around 2 a.m. I chalked it up to the house settling. It's an old house. I'd tell myself that every time I walked down the hall with my teeth clenched. But I started noticing other stuff too. I'd find the cabinet under the sink open, even though I never used it. The chair by the front window would be facing a little to the left instead of straight ahead. Once, the fan in the kitchen turned on by itself. I had to unplug it to make it stop. I told myself it was all normal. That I was just bad at remembering things. That maybe I'd bumped the chair or opened the cabinet and forgot. It was easier to believe that than anything else. Then the notes started showing up. At first I thought they were mine. Little things like buy soap or trash day moved to Thursday, stuff I could have easily written. But the handwriting was off, not by a lot, just slightly messier than mine. The letters leaned more. The T's were crossed lower. They always showed up on the counter by the coffee maker. Just once a week. I started saving them in a drawer. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want anyone to tell me it was stress or sleepwalking or whatever else makes things easier to swallow. One night, I had a friend over for dinner. He went to use the bathroom and came back with this weird look on his face and said, "Who's the old guy in that photo by the stairs?" I didn't have a photo by the stairs. I went to look, and sure enough, there was a photo I'd never seen before, a black and white one in a wooden frame. It showed a man sitting in a lawn chair next to a garden hose. He was smiling, sort of. I asked my friend to describe him, and he said bald, mustache, big glasses. I took the photo down and threw it in a box in the shed. It was gone the next day. I know this sounds like I'm building to something. Like there's going to be a twist, or a big reveal. There isn't. It's just been this slow erosion, this feeling that I'm sharing the space with someone who never left. And I think it's my fault. I think when I lied about the house being empty, I didn't just tell a harmless story. I think I ignored something that wanted to be remembered, and now it's trying to be remembered whether I like it or not. Last winter, I found a box in the attic. It wasn't mine. I don't use the attic. It had old receipts, some postcards, a broken pipe, and a pair of glasses that looked like the ones my friend described. I put it all back. Closed the attic. Didn't go back up. But I think about it every time the wind shifts in the house or the floor creaks under a spot I haven't stepped on. I still live here. I haven't tried to move. I don't think I could. I think I belong here now the way Arthur did. I've started writing him notes, leaving them by the coffee maker. Just little things like, "Not today," or "I heard you." I don't know if it makes a difference. But the lights flicker less, and the notes stopped showing up. The handwriting never changed, but they stopped. Some nights I sit in the chair by the window and turn it slightly to the left before I go to bed. It makes the house feel calm. It makes me feel like I'm not just squatting in someone else's story. I don't know if this means anything. I just wanted to put it somewhere. to say it out loud in some way, to remind myself that I didn't imagine all of it, that the house is still quiet but not empty, that maybe nothing ever is. That story really gets under the skin, not because of anything loud or dramatic, but because of how quiet it all is. It starts with one small lie, the kind of thing anybody might say to make a moment easier, and then it feels like the house never let you take it back. The flickering lights, the creaking floorboard, the photo by the stairs. None of it on its own is proof of anything, but together it adds up to something you can't just shrug off. And the way you've started leaving notes, or turning the chair a little to the left, it almost feels like you and Arthur found a way to live in the same place. Not as strangers, but not quite as roommates either. Just two people sharing the same air. I think what sticks with me is how you said you belong there now. Like the house chose you as much as you chose it. That's heavy, but it is also kind of beautiful. Not everything we inherit has to be clean and easy. Sometimes it is messy, and sometimes it is haunted. All right, I think that's a good place to stop for now. Thanks for sitting with me through these stories. They are strange and heavy, but they're also the kind of thing you don't want to keep to yourself, and I'm glad you shared them. Let's pick it up again soon, see where the next one takes us.